What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Sports Degenerate Podcast. Today we got a fantasy football preview for week 3. We are going to be previewing all of Sunday's games. If you are new to this channel, the way we do Sunday, because there are so many games, I don't go into depth on all of the guys that are must starts. I really just bring up the guys that are fringe players or guys that I don't think you should be starting. So let's hop into it. We have a lot of games to get into. Let's go. The first game we got this week is Giants versus Browns. So I think there is only one stud in this game. It's Malik Neighbors. He has already proven that he is a great talent. The Browns are a tough matchup, but if I have him, I'm trusting the talent. I am going to start him. Let's move on to the quarterbacks. So we all know Daniel Jones is not a start in a single quarterback league. He did have a decent week last week, but don't trust it. He was playing the Commanders, who are a terrible defense. Now he's playing the Browns, who are a top 5 defense. Do not start Daniel Jones. Deshaun Watson, I actually don't mind this week. He is a top 15 quarterback for me this week. The Giants have allowed over 18 points per game to quarterbacks this year, and Watson gives you a solid floor with his rushing. So if you are in need of a quarterback, he is a perfectly fine start. I would start him over players like Brock Purdy, Baker Mayfield, and Sam Darnold. Let's move on to running backs. Jerome Ford for the Browns. I also like this week. He is a top 20 running back for me. The Giants defense is also terrible against the run. They have given up over 17 points per game to running backs this year. And actually, I don't mind the talent. I think Ford is a solid player. Not elite, but solid. I would start him over players like Rachaad White, Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, players like that. I like him this week. The other running back for the Browns, Deontay Foreman. If you are desperate for a running back and really need one, I don't think he's a terrible play just for the reason that he is going to get volume. Last week he had 14 carries, and I think that happens again because I think the Browns have a lead in this game. So if he gets that type of volume against this bad Giants defense, I don't think he's terrible, but I don't love him just because I don't like the talent. And then we got Giants running back Devin Singletary. I don't mind Singletary as a talent. He's a solid back, but he's outside the top 30 for me this week. The Browns defense is really good, man. They have given up some success to fantasy running backs this year in the first 2 weeks, but it's been touchdown related. Zeke had 12 points because he had a touchdown. ETN had 14 points because he had a touchdown. I just don't see Singletary having a touchdown this week, so I think he is going to be under 10 points. Do not start him. I would rather start players like Zamir White, Chuba Hubbard, Najee, Javonte Williams, Carson Steele, Austin Eckler. Players like that, I would start over him. And let's go to wide receiver, man. So let's talk about Amari Cooper. He has been really bad this year, but I'm still going to start him. If you are in a 2 wide receiver league, he's not a must start, but a 3 wide receiver league, I think you have to start him. He's had 17 targets through 2 games, so he's getting the volume, and against this bad Giants defense, I think this is a bounce back spot for him. So I actually don't mind Cooper this week. Put him in your lineup. I like him this week. Jerry Jeudy, the number 2 receiver for the Browns. I think he's a lower end wide receiver 3. So in a 3 wide receiver league, I don't hate him. And I also don't hate him as a flex. He's had over 11 points in both games this year. Watson has been finding him on scramble drills. So against this bad Giants defense, I don't think is a terrible option. And then the other wide receiver for the Giants, Wan'Dale Robinson. I really prefer not to start him just because, like I mentioned, the Browns are a tough matchup. But he has given you around 10 points per week just because he gets 4 or 5 catches. Daniel Jones peppers him with the little dump-off passes. So if you are desperate in a deep league, he's not a terrible flex, but I would really prefer not to start him this week. And then there aren't any fantasy-relevant tight ends in this game, so that's it for this game. Next game we got is Bears versus Colts. So Jonathan Taylor, Anthony Richardson, must starts. And I still think DJ Moore is a must start. But this is his last week. If he doesn't perform again this week, we might have to rethink things, but this week, lock him in. Let's move on to the other quarterback, Caleb Williams for the Bears. Do not start him in a single quarterback league. He just hasn't shown us enough. He hasn't even been an average quarterback yet. So I would rather start guys like Gardner Minshew, Justin Fields, Andy Dalton. Those guys have safer floors. I'm not out on Caleb for the whole year, but I have to see something for him before I trust him. Let's move on to DeAndre Swift for the Bears. So he is outside running back 2 status for me. He's more of a flex at this point. He's been under 10 points, guys. Like, I can't trust him. The sad thing is the Colts actually are a great matchup for running backs. They have been really bad against running backs. So is there a chance he pops off a big run? 100%. But I'm not trusting him, man. I would rather start guys like Zach Moss, Jerome Ford, Zamir White, and Chuba Hubbard. Let's move on to wide receivers. Michael Pittman, man, this is sad, but I was low on him going into draft season for this exact reason. Anthony Richardson just isn't a reliable quarterback for his receivers. Could he improve? 100%. But like I said, I have to see it before I trust it. So in a 2 wide receiver league, I'm totally fine benching him just because he's had under 10 points in both games. The Bears defense is pretty good. But I'm not going to go too far. In a 3 wide receiver league, I still want to start Pittman just because of his talent. He can always break off a big play. So you can do what you want depending on what your league format is. I would rather start players like Jameson Williams, JSN, Rashid Shaheed, Tank Dell, Brian Thomas. I would start all those guys over Michael Pittman. Let's move on to the other Colts receivers. So Alec Pierce is a deep league flex. He actually has been pretty solid this year. He's had over 15 points in both games. But I think it's kind of fluky. A lot of it has come off of touchdown production. And the Bears defense is good. I don't see Pierce getting a touchdown, so I'm kind of worried about him. But in a deep league, he's a dart throw. He's shown upside. I don't hate it. Josh Downs. So he is making his season debut. He's been hurt. I want to put Josh Downs on my bench just to see what it looks like. Because last year, Richardson actually targeted him a lot. But I'm not putting him in a lineup until he proves me something. Let's move on to the other Bears receivers. So Keenan Allen, if he plays, which it doesn't look like he's going to play. It looks like he's still hurt. But if he does play, he's around the same range as Michael Pittman. And then Rome Odunze, the rookie receiver for the Bears. Do not start him. Please do not start him. He hasn't proven us anything yet. So I would rather start Alec Pierce over him. And then there are no fantasy relevant tight ends in this game. So let's move on to the next game. Next game we got is Texans versus Vikings. If you have any of these players, they are must starts. CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, and Aaron Jones. Let's move on to the other quarterback, Sam Darnold. So he is a top 20 quarterback for me this week. So not a terrible option if you need a quarterback. The only thing I'm a little bit worried about is the Texans pass rush. I think they might affect Darnold a little bit, but I don't hate him. I would rather start guys like Baker, Deshaun Watson, Derek Carr, and Geno Smith over him, though. Let's move on to the other running backs. So, Texans running back situation. Joe Mixon is ruled out. Dameon Pierce is ruled out. So that leaves Cam Akers as the starting running back. So there's always upside if you are the starting running back for a CJ Stroud offense. And Akers is most likely going to get volume. But I'm a little bit worried. So he's more of a low-end RB2 for me. But if you need a running back, he's not a bad option. The only things that scare me is 1, the Vikings defense actually isn't bad. They're pretty good. And 2, Cam Akers fumbled last week. So I'm a little bit scared, but he's not a terrible option. And then Ty Chandler, the number 2 running back behind Aaron Jones. He's getting you around 10 touches per game, which isn't terrible for fantasy, but it's also not great. So if you need a running back to plug in last minute, he's fine. He's explosive. He can give you a big play. But I like him more as a stash on your bench just in case Aaron Jones gets hurt. Let's move on to receiver. So I still like Tank Dell as a wide receiver 3. I know he hasn't had a great year so far, but we all know he's explosive. He's going to have a huge game soon. You do not want to miss it. These are guys I would start Tank Dell over. Michael Pittman, George Pickens, Jalen Waddle, and Calvin Ridley. I like Dell's upside over those guys. And then the last receiver is Jalen Naylor for the Vikings. So Jordan Addison is out for this game again, which makes Naylor the number 2. And he did flash last week with over 12 PPR points, but he's a rookie. I kind of want to see more from him before I fully trust him. But in a deep league, I don't mind him. He has upside. And then there aren't really any tight ends. I know some people are trying to start Dalton Schultz, but he hasn't even gotten 5 points this week. So don't start him, and then don't start any Vikings tight end. Let's move on to the next game. Next, we got Eagles versus Saints. This game is full of must starts. We got Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, Devonta Smith, Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Derek Carr, and Rashid Shaheed are all must starts. Let's kind of quickly talk about Derek Carr and Shaheed because those aren't guys you drafted to be must starts, but I think they are. I would start Carr over people like Purdy and Goff, guys that you drafted to be your starter. I would rather have Carr over Purdy and Goff. And then Shaheed, I would put him over Michael Pittman, Amari Cooper, Jalen Waddle, George Pickens, Calvin Ridley, players like that. Like, the way I think about it is the way the Saints offense looks right now, you have to start all of these players until the Saints start looking bad. So that just leaves the tight ends. Dallas Goedert is a solid starting tight end. If you have him, start him. Don't drop him for anybody else. In the Eagles offense, there's always upside for a touchdown, and Goddard usually gives you a solid floor with like 4 or 5 catches a game. And then Taysom Hill for the Saints. He's never a bad option if you need a streamer. He has crazy upside. He runs the ball, he passes the ball, he catches the ball. If you need a streamer, he's not a terrible streamer at all. That game was easy. Let's move on to the next one. Next, we got Chargers versus Steelers, which is the complete opposite of Eagles versus Saints. There are no must starts in this game. Let's start with the quarterbacks, Herbert and Fields. Do not start them. They are both outside the top 25. The Chargers and Steelers want to do 2 things: run the ball and play defense. So I don't expect a lot of scoring or passing. If I had to pick one, I would go Justin Fields just because of his rushing yards. Let's move on to running backs. So J.K. Dobbins has been great this year. Amazing. But I'm scared of the Steelers defense. I'm terrified of their defense. So Dobbins is outside of running back 2 status for me this week because of that. I would rather start guys like Jerome Ford, DeAndre Swift, Zamir White, Carson Steele, and Chuba Hubbard. Let's move over to the Steelers. Najee Harris. He is a little bit lower than Dobbins, but basically in the same range. I'm scared of the Chargers defense, who is also very good. So all the guys I mentioned that I would start over Dobbins, I would start over Najee as well. And then Jaylen Warren, even though I love the talent, he's going to be lower than Najee and Dobbins. Right now, he's the clear number 2 behind Najee in the offense. Let's move on to wide receivers. So Pickens actually isn't a terrible play. If you are in a 3 wide receiver league, I think you start him at least as a flex, if not your wide receiver 3. He's explosive. He has big play potential. And Justin Fields has connected on multiple deep balls this year. So he's not like a must start, but I'm totally fine starting him. But I would rather start guys like Brian Thomas, Deontay Johnson, and Calvin Ridley. I think those players have a safer floor, but still chances for a touchdown. Quentin Johnson for the Chargers. So he's been really good this year as well. He's led the team in targets. He's had multiple touchdowns. But I'm scared of the Steelers defense, like I said. I like him more as a stash, not as a start. That leaves tight ends. So the Chargers have no tight ends. Do not start any of the Chargers. Pat Freiermuth for the Steelers is a solid streaming tight end. He has gotten around 7 to 8 points in both weeks, which is solid for a tight end. So if you need a streamer, Freiermuth is totally fine. That game was also easy. There are no must starts. Let's move on to the next one. Next, we got Broncos versus Buccaneers. So if you have Mike Evans or Chris Godwin, they are must starts. If Rachaad White plays, he is questionable, so check out the injury reports. But if he plays, he is a must start as well. The Broncos' run defense is terrible. They have let over 100 yards of rushing in both games. Let's move on to quarterbacks. So we all know Bo Nix is not a starting quarterback unless you are in a 2 quarterback league. Baker Mayfield, though, is a top 15 quarterback. He is a solid start if you need a quarterback. The only other streaming quarterback I would start over him is Derek Carr, but Baker is solid. Running backs. So if Rashad White doesn't play, backup running back Bucky Irving is a must start. So basically, whichever starting running back starts for the Bucks, you have to start them 100%. But even if Rashad White does play, I still like Bucky Irving as a flex. He's getting you around 10 touches per game. And like I said, the Broncos defense is terrible. So 10 touches against this terrible defense is a flex. And then Javonte Williams, running back for the Broncos. He's outside running back 2 status, but I don't mind him. He's not a bad flex. The Bucks run defense also isn't good, but the Broncos offense isn't good either. So it's like one of those things where it's like good matchup, but not good offense. But because of the matchup, I like him as a flex. And then Courtland Sutton, the only relevant wide receiver for the Broncos. He's a flex. He's been really bad this year, but he's gotten 16 targets. He's gotten the volume. The Bucs secondary is really hurt, but it kind of depends on, do you want to trust Bo Nix? It's up to you. I like him as a flex. And then there are no starting tight ends in this game. On to the next game. Next, we got Packers versus Titans. So the running backs are the only must starts. Josh Jacobs and Tony Pollard. Let's move on to the quarterbacks. Do not start any of these quarterbacks in a single quarterback league. Don't start Malik Willis. Don't start Will Levis. Even if Jordan Love plays, which I doubt he does, but at the moment he's questionable. But even if Love plays, don't start him first week off the injury. Don't trust him. The only other running back we have to talk about is Tajay Spears, the backup running back or number 2 running back for the Titans. At this point, he's a desperation flex. He is getting decent volume, but he really hasn't done anything with it. So I really would just roster Spears, but don't start him. Wide receivers. So Calvin Ridley is a wide receiver 3. If you're in a 3 wide receiver league, he is a must start. But in a 2 wide receiver league, I don't mind benching him. Will Levis is scary. Like, he is not very good. And the Packers defense isn't that bad either. So if you don't want to deal with the headache, I don't mind benching him. But in a 3 wide receiver league, he still has upside to start him 100%. And then I don't want to start any of the Packers wide receivers, even if Love plays. I don't want to start them. The Titans defense has been really good this year, so I would rather just avoid it altogether. I'd rather start Jawan Jennings, Demarcus Robinson, Khalil Shakir, Brandon Cooks, all those type of players over any Packers receiver. And then there are no fantasy relevant tight ends. Let's move on. Next, we got Panthers versus Raiders. So the only must starts in this game are the Raiders pass catchers, Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers. Do not start any of these quarterbacks. Do not start Andy Dalton. Do not start Gardner Minshew in single quarterback leagues. The running backs are a little interesting. Chuba Hubbard and Zamir White both haven't been great so far, but I kind of like both of them as low-end RB2s or flexes. So for Chuba Hubbard, I think he should be better with Dalton. I think he has a solid floor of around like 10 to 11 PPR points. But with Dalton, I think this offense is going to be better and have more upside for touchdowns, so I don't hit him. And then Zamir White is just a matchup thing. The Panthers have allowed over 20 points per game to running backs. Basically, if Zamir White doesn't do it this week, he's not going to do it any other week, so I don't mind him just because of the matchup. And then Alexander Mattison is a deep league flex. He is the passing downs back and the goal line back. And against this terrible defense, there's always upside for a little bit of something, but only in deep leagues. And then wide receivers. So Jacoby Myers, number 2 receiver for the Raiders. He's a deep league flex. He hasn't done much this year, but he is on the field for almost every play. So there's always potential for a touchdown, but I really don't love him. I wouldn't want to start him unless you are in a super deep league. And then Deontay Johnson is a low-end wide receiver 3 for me. He also hasn't done anything this year, but I love the talent. Deontay Johnson is a great route runner, and I think with a competent quarterback in Andy Dalton, he has a solid floor. I would start him over Michael Pittman, Jalen Waddle, Terry McLaurin, players like that, just because I really like him as a talent. So I could be wrong, but I kind of like Deontay this week. And then don't start any Panthers tight end at all. The only tight end you should be starting is Brock Bowers. That's it. On to the next game. We got Dolphins versus Seahawks next. So must starts are Tyreek Hill. Yes, even with Skylar Thompson, Tyreek Hill is a must start. Devon Achane, DK Metcalf, and Zach Charbonnet. Those are all the must starts. So for the quarterbacks, I like Geno as a top 15 quarterback. He's had 20 points in both games this year. The only other streaming quarterback I would start over him is Derek Carr, but I like Geno. And then do not start Skylar Thompson in a single quarterback league. We all know that. Wide receivers. So Jalen Waddle is still a wide receiver 3. He's still explosive. He can still make big plays, but I would start Tank Dell, Deontay Johnson, Amari Cooper, and Rashid Shaheed over him, just because I'm a little bit worried about the quarterback. And then JSN for the Seahawks is also a solid wide receiver 3. He did have a big week last week, a huge week last week, but in week 1, he did nothing. So, I don't know. Just because of his upside, I like him as a wide receiver 3. I would start him over Jalen Waddle, Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, and George Pickens. I do like him this week, but I don't love him. And then there are no starting tight ends in this game. Easy game. On to the next one. Next, we got Lions versus Cardinals. This game is just like the Eagles versus Saints. It's full of studs. So let's start off with the must starts for the Lions. You're starting both running backs in Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. You're starting St. Brown 100%. At this point, Jameson Williams has to be a must start. He's been good in both weeks. You got to keep starting him. And then Sam Laporta, even though he hasn't been great, you have to start him. And then for the Cardinals, you're starting Kyler Murray 100%. You can't set Marvin Harrison Jr. after last week. And Trey McBride must start tight end. And then James Conner must start running back. The only other thing we have to bring up is Jared Goff. Jared Goff is a solid starter. He's a top 15 quarterback. Don't hate him at all. But I would start Derek Carr over him, and I would start Geno Smith over him. But other than that, if you have him, you're starting him. That's literally it for that game. Everyone is a start. Next, we got Ravens versus Cowboys. So there are a lot of must starts. Lamar, Dak, CeeDee Lamb, Zay Flowers, Derrick Henry, Mark Andrews, and Jake Ferguson, if he plays, are all must starts. Let's talk about the Cowboys running backs. So I do not want to start these guys at all. Last week, there was a 3-way split between Zeke, Dowdle, and Vaughn. A 3-way split. So I would rather start low-end guys like Alexander Madison, Tajay Spears, and Bucky Irving. I would start all those guys over the Cowboys running back. I am completely out on the Cowboys backfield. Only other wide receiver we have to bring up is Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tobler, the number 2 and number 3 receivers for the Cowboys. They are deep league flexes. I don't hate them. There's always upside in this Cowboys offense, but I don't know. I think they have low floors. I would rather start guys like Juwan Jennings, Tyler Johnson, Quentin Johnston, and Khalil Shakir. I just think those guys have safer floors. And then tight ends. So Isaiah Likely is a solid tight end if you are in need, but I don't think he's top 12. He always has upside. He's an explosive player, but I still think Mark Andrews is the number 1. So he's like a top 15 streaming guy. And then Luke Schoonmaker, the backup for Ferguson. If Ferguson doesn't play, I don't think Schoonmaker is a must start. He would be in like the same range as Likely, like top 15. So that's it for this game. On to the next one. We got 49ers versus Rams. So Jordan Mason and Kyron Williams, both running backs, are locks. And Brandon Ayuk is a must start as well. I know he hasn't done much this year, but with Kittle and Debo out, you have to start him. Let's move on to the quarterbacks. So Purdy is a decent start, like top 15, just outside the top 12. I would rather start Derek Carr, Geno Smith, and Baker over him, but he's a solid start. Matt Stafford, try to avoid at all cost. He has no one to throw to. He has no offensive line. He's outside the top 20. I would rather start Trevor Lawrence, Kirk Cousins, Deshaun Watson, Sam Darnold, Baker, Geno, players like that. So the other wide receivers. Juwan Jennings is a super solid start. With Debo and Kittle out, I feel like he gets you at least 5 catches, right? So I think in 3 wide receiver leagues, he's a must start. In 2 wide receiver leagues, depends what you have, but I would start him over Pittman, Waddle, and Pickens, 100%. And then Demarcus Robinson for the Rams. I put him in the same exact range as Juwan Jennings. There's no Puka. There's no Cup. If I had to pick between the two, I think I would probably go Jennings just because I like the offense a little bit more. But same range. And then Tyler Johnson, the number 2 for the Rams now, is a little bit more deeper league. I don't know. I don't know if I love the talent. He probably gives you like 4 to 5 catches, but I don't know. I don't love him. He's okay. And then tight ends. Kittle's out, but don't try to chase the backup tight end for the 49ers. I don't think that's going to be a thing. Colby Parkinson, tight end for the Rams. Top 15 streamer guy. Not terrible. Probably give you like 3 to 4 catches. Who knows if he gets a touchdown. Whatever. He's whatever. So that's the end of that game. That game is a little bit gross. Lastly, we got Chiefs versus Falcons Sunday night. We have a decent amount of must-starts. Mahomes, Bijan, London, Rice, Pitts, and Kelsey are all must-starts. Let's move on. Kirk Cousins isn't a terrible play, but he's outside the top 15. I want to see more consistency before I fully trust him. I would rather start Darnold, Geno, Carr, Baker, and Watson. Let's move on to the other running backs. So the Chiefs backfield. Carson Steele is the main running downs back. He's going to get most of the carries for the Chiefs, which makes him valuable for fantasy. But he's a low-end RB2 for me, just because if he doesn't get a touchdown, he probably doesn't do well. But he's in the Chiefs offense. There's always upside for a touchdown. So not terrible. I would start him over Singletary, Javonte, and Najee. And then the passing downs back for the Chiefs, Samaje Perine. He's a little bit lower than Carson Steele. He's like a flex, not really an RB2. But he gives you a solid floor because he will get catches. And in this Chiefs offense, he can always catch a touchdown. I would start him over Najee, Eckler, and Javonte. And then Tyler Algier, the number 2 running back for the Falcons. He gives you a solid floor because he gives you around 10 to 12 carries, but not much upside at all because Bijan is the clear number 1. So unless you are in a deep league, he's just a stash. And then lastly, the wide receivers. So Xavier Worthy is a low-end wide receiver 3. He has tons of upside, but also a low floor. So if he doesn't make a big play at this point, he's not really doing much. But like I said, he has upside. So I would start him over Terry McLaurin, Michael Pittman, and Jalen Waddle, players like that, just because I think he has more upside than those guys. And then Darnell Mooney, number 2 receiver for the Falcons. He has been good this year. Last week he had a good game. But he's a deep league flex because, like I said, I need to see more consistency from Kirk before I start trusting this passing game. But he's okay. But I would rather start Tyler Johnson, Quentin Johnson, Xavier Worthy, and Juwan Jennings over him. So that is the fantasy preview for all of Sunday's games. Like always, if you have fantasy questions, comment on the podcast, comment on the YouTube channel, or DM me on social media. I always love helping you guys with fantasy questions. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I love all of you.